The technical not recession. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainsley Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, welcome back, Alex, to talk about recessions, what they are we in one, despite what we keep being told. It certainly feels to the average Australian that something isn't quite right. So how are you going today, Alex?
I'm going well. How are you going?
I'm going well as also. You were talking in the news today. It was an interesting piece that really pulled together a lot of things that you've been discussing over a long time. So I felt it was a really good one for you to really sink your teeth into, that really explained a lot of these, how they all related, these things that you've been bringing up, particularly around this idea that we've probably been experiencing something resembling a recession. So I thought we could maybe start off today by just discussing what a recession is and how you're looking at it currently through the data that we've been seeing.
Yeah, so there's been some great articles this week from The Australian, The Economist, from everyone basically starting to slam the Australian economy for all the reasons that, here at Ainsley we've been talking about for quite some time. The migration numbers are a band-aid. Australia is in a lot worse shape than what people realise, and this per capita recession thing is really starting to capture everyone's attention for all the reasons you said. Feels like a recession, but not a recession. But it is a recession in that it's a per capita recession. So everyone's income or real wages are dropping, but Australia's GDP growth keeps growing. So in order to be classed as a recession, you need two quarters of negative GDP growth. And Australia is skimming it through at the moment. One of the last GDPs I know was 0.1%. I can't remember the other one. We're skimming it through and not a recession, but then our population is growing at 2-3%. So that, the real, for us not to be in a per capita GDP recession, we'd have to be seeing sort of 2 and 3% GDP, but we're seeing 0.1s and sub ones, which means we're in a per capita recession.
And it's a really interesting point because you can have a technical definition. It's like there's this line in the sand that when you cross that line, all of a sudden everything's bad, but you can be, a millimeter off from that line and everything's good, apparently. Like that's really what you're highlighting as well, isn't it?
I really feel like a lot of these numbers out of everywhere at the moment are just the government going, right, what's a GDP? What is a recession? Oh, it's GDP. How do we stop that? Well, let's just add more migrants. Going back to when Rudd was around, when we entered the 2008, not a recession then, when he gave out $1,000 to everyone and everyone spent money and, we're not in a recession. COVID, we avoided recession by handing money out. There's a lot of ways that that governments right now seem to be manipulating the data for their own good, because it's all just a popularity contest. I mean, look at the job numbers that come out of the US. They are revised down month after month.
Yeah.
So there's a beautiful headline, and then the next month it's quietly revised down. So, there's too much manipulation going on in the data now. And the Ponzi scheme, which is this migration scheme in Australia, is, in my opinion, starting to unravel. As you know, a Ponzi scheme happens and it's small at the start, but you need to create a bigger base and to keep the Ponzi scheme going. Well, that seems to be what's happening in Australia right now. 600,000 migrants last year. Take that out of the equation, and where we are, according to the Economist magazine, in the worst performing Western country in the world right now.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second because I was very interested in that analysis from The Economist. But are you saying here with the migration, I like this idea, the Ponzi scheme aspect of it, you're effectively saying that it's what we're experiencing is being built on the back of all these migrants being entered into the economy. So that's what's manipulating the numbers. Is that how you're describing it?
That's exactly what I'm describing. So we are not in a technical recession because of our population growth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would be.
So if you sort of strip the migration numbers out and you didn't have that net inflow of people, that's where we get into this manipulation of the data through policy.
That's right. So if you look at our disposable income. So in 2008, the disposable income per person was around $12,000. It peaked around COVID at 14,500. And the idea of this per capita recession is the fact that right now we're back to 12,500. So we've dropped.
Yes.
So everyone has less money. Everyone knows they have less money. That's not unbeknownst to anyone at the moment. So everyone's feeling it.
So linking that back to The Economist, because there was that really interesting chart that you put in the news about The Economist highlighting that we were the worst advanced economy in the world for this idea of entrenched inflation. So what specifically do they mean by that term? Is that to do with property specifically?
Entrenched inflation is everything. It covers, I guess, policies that mean that costs aren't under control. So we'll pull property into it in a second because it is probably the biggest one.
Mhm.
But even energy prices, when gas skyrocketed last year, really, there were no policies in place to stop inflation setting in. There still aren't. So the government put the $12 cap on. Well, I mean, funnily enough, gas prices have sat around $12 ever since. So I don't think, it was probably it probably created inflation, their policy. Then, if you look at food at the moment, where Australia is actually, disinflationary in food, whereby the rest of the world has huge price hikes on food, but because we're entering an El Nino or just in an El Nino, we've got beef prices as some of the lowest they've ever been, whereas in the US they're the highest. But as we leave that and all the beef's already been sold because everyone's preparing for a drought, beef becomes more expensive. So climatically, we're about to enter an inflationary stage as well. And then finally, housing 500,000 immigrants when no one knows how to house them, when there is not enough housing, does not, move rents down. Rents are up in some places 30%. So, and then, the RBA retaliates, there's no other word for it, with interest rate hikes because they've
Which
got
feeds
no other
directly back in again to higher
property
property.
price.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not property prices, but just inflation in property. So what the government's doing in migration, another interesting thing in the news today was RBA's forecast. Last year, June 2022, they almost perfectly forecast what was going to happen to real wages, which is they dropped a lot. And they're saying it's going to become even worse. And they keep highlighting it's because of migration. It's because there's, this property bubble, not bubble, but the property hikes that are having to happen because it's become scarce.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction. It's not really a bubble in the traditional sense. It's not wild speculation that's going on here. It's true demand and supply. It's a very simple economic problem saying that you just cannot get affordable property. Like there might be property available to rent. We were having this discussion internally, a few people this morning saying, sure, there are properties around the place that you can rent, but only if you're prepared to go up into that $700-800 a week, and that's Brisbane prices, more expensive in other places of the country, bracket, but that's just too high for the average person. So, if there's a place down in the $500 a week range that they could afford, you can't get them. They don't exist. So,
and interestingly, the other thing is we have the lowest rental occupancy, so the lowest
yes.
availability in the world right now. So that's another stat that's come out recently.
Well, one of them we were looking at was well under 1%. It was like 0.5%.
I think it's 0.9, but maybe in some of the cities it's 0.5.
Yeah, this was for a specific suburb, but these numbers, anything below, I think the number was 2%, that was quoted to me in the discussion that was considered tight, anything below 2%, and we're talking fractions of a percent in some places.
Yeah, it has become an insane situation where the RBA is going to keep hiking rates because they have no choice, because the inflation is going to keep coming through in property prices because there's 600,000 migrants and previously we had 25 million people. I mean, it's 3% immigration. It's insane.
Yeah, massive numbers
And,
when you think of it,
know,
percentage. Yes.
we were also, you and I were talking before about how the Albanese government's come out and said, we need to make this many houses, gone to the States, and the States have said, how? So he's created a policy fallacy, like it's impossible. So why even create a policy that cannot be met?
Yeah. And we were talking about that as well. I know from personal experience, it's not snapping your fingers and it gets done. Still, properties that were promised 12 months ago are still in the final stages of being developed and coming out because it takes a long time. There was backlogs, there's been shortages of labor, all sorts of reasons for existing builds that aren't finished yet, let alone, saying you can whip up out of nowhere magically another million properties.
And if you were a developer right now, with interest rates where they were, property prices where they are, would you go and buy a speculative piece of property to build some units on that in 2 years' time you're selling without really knowing a very clear picture of what this is going to look like?
Exactly.
Because everyone knows,
of course, yeah.
Everyone knows this isn't working. So, there's policies to say it should work, but there's practicalities to policies that aren't working. So why would anyone speculate on that?
Absolutely. And at an individual level, and I think this is where we can sort of wrap this up, but if you think about real wages, so that's those wages after inflation's been taken into account, you were mentioning they've been falling. But obviously that's going to be the biggest determinant of standard of living. So like you were just talking about builders or developers who are going to maybe wait, surely that flows on to individuals as well. When their standard of living is under a lot of pressure, it's going to start dictating how people behave, I imagine.
Well, I mean, real wages in the last year have dropped 5.1%. I mean, that is enormous. So everyone is 5% poorer right now. And would you go and build a house right now, not having any certainty? RBA is still saying there's going to be rate hikes.
Yes. And you already feel 5% worse off because you are 5% worse off than you were 12 months ago.
And this is the great Ponzi scheme that's been going on. We keep replacing capital, so investment in businesses, just with labor. We throw labor at the problem. We're now at the bottleneck of the Ponzi scheme, the end of the Ponzi scheme, where we don't have the correct investment, we don't have the correct jobs available, and something's going to have to give because businesses aren't going to invest right now. And that will mean that there's less jobs in the future too. So where are all these, are we going to have a rapid increase in unemployment rate when this all falls over?
Yeah, that'll certainly be something to watch because that will be the one that's undeniable, I suppose, in terms of requiring a response from the central bank, because they won't be able to keep raising into that environment, even if they need to. If you've got a spike in unemployment, I think that'll be probably where they draw the line.
And then you'll see a proper property bubble.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So it all feeds into.
No one wants.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you for that as always. It's really been stuff that you've been talking about for a long time, as I said at the start, and bringing that all together.
Something else to talk about, I think, going forward.
Well, you will, because if you keep tying all these threads in and keep getting it correct, then we're going to need to find another angle for you to give us some foresight on. So, been very good on this one. So, thank you for that.
No problem.
Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, reach out with any questions or comments on the social platforms. That's us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Branko to discuss all things markets and metals. Until then, have a great rest of the day, everyone.